26,000. That's how many American Marines were killed or wounded on a single volcanic island no bigger than 8 square miles. The fight lasted 36 days. The Japanese garrison was 21,000 men. The Americans expected to take Iwo Jima in 5 days. They were wrong by 31 days, and the general responsible never even let his men die in banzai charges. He fought smarter than that. Today, we're ranking the 5 Japanese generals American forces were most terrified of in World War II. Number 5 forced Americans to learn jungle warfare the hard way. Number 3 made American commanders reconsider invading Japan altogether. Number 2 humiliated Douglas MacArthur so completely that Washington ordered the general evacuated before he could be captured. And number 1, he turned a tiny island into a meat grinder that still haunts the Marine Corps to this day. This isn't about propaganda or wartime myth. This is about the commanders who adapted, who innovated, and who made American soldiers genuinely afraid to enter their sectors. Let's count down the 5 most terrifying Japanese generals of World War II. But before we start, if you want to see who takes the number 1 spot, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to recommend this video to more history fans like you. And subscribe so you never miss our rankings. Now, let's start with number 5. Number 5, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake. Here's what you need to know about Guadalcanal. It was the first major American offensive of the entire Pacific War. August 7, 1942. Green Marines who had never seen combat, against an enemy that had been conquering everything in its path for 8 months. And the general commanding the Japanese response was Harukichi Hyakutake, commander of the 17th Army. When the Marines landed and captured Henderson Field, Hayakutake was given one order: take it back. And for the next 6 months, he threw everything he had at those American lines. What made Hyakutake terrifying wasn't his resources, it was his tactics. He systematically employed night attacks, coordinated banzai charges, and jungle infiltration on a scale the Marines had never faced. Wave after wave designed to get inside American lines before anyone knew they were there. The Battle of Edson's Ridge. September 12 through 14, 1942. Hayakutake sent 6,000 men through 17 miles of jungle to hit Henderson Field from the south. Meanwhile, Japanese destroyers ran nightly resupply missions down the Solomon Islands chain, what the Marines called the Tokyo Express, ferrying more troops and supplies under cover of darkness. 900 Marines against wave after wave of screaming Japanese soldiers charging through the darkness. For 2 days, the Japanese launched assault after assault, hand-to-hand combat in the dark, bayonets against bayonets. The Marines were pushed back along the entire length of what they renamed Bloody Ridge, and they held, barely. That was the pattern on Guadalcanal. Hayakutake would mass his forces and attack at night. The Marines would fight through chaos and darkness to hold their perimeter. In October, Hayakutake personally commanded 20,000 troops in another assault on Henderson Field. He was so confident of victory that his staff prepared documents for the American surrender ceremony. They never got to use them. Here's the critical statistic. Japanese losses on Guadalcanal: over 30,000 dead, 14,800 killed in combat. But the rest, over 9,000, died from disease and starvation as American control of the sea and air slowly strangled Japanese supply lines. American losses: 1,600 killed, 4,200 wounded. But those numbers don't capture what Guadalcanal really was. Guadalcanal was the classroom. This was where American forces first learned what fighting the Japanese actually meant. The night attacks, the refusal to surrender, the willingness to die to the last man. Hayakutake taught the Marines lessons they would carry for the rest of the war, and he did it on America's first offensive when they were at their most vulnerable. The Marines who survived Guadalcanal said the same thing. The jungle was terrifying. The disease was relentless. But the Japanese attacks at night, when you couldn't see what was coming, when you could only hear the screams, that was when men discovered what fear really meant. Number 4. Lieutenant General Masaharu Homma, April 9, 1942. 75,000 American and Filipino soldiers surrendered on the Bataan Peninsula. It was the largest surrender in American military history. The general who forced that surrender was Masaharu Homma, and the man he humiliated was Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur had promised to defend the Philippines. He had 130,000 troops under his command. He told Washington he could hold the beaches and drive back any Japanese invasion. He was catastrophically wrong. When Homma's 14th Army landed at Lingayen Gulf on December 22, 1941, MacArthur's beach defense collapsed within a day. His forces were pushed back, then pushed back again. Within weeks, MacArthur's army was trapped on the Bataan Peninsula, cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Homma's approach was methodical. He probed, he pressured, he maintained steady operational tempo while siege conditions did their work. When Tokyo demanded faster results, Homma refused to waste his men in costly frontal assaults. His superiors were furious. They thought he was too cautious, too contaminated by Western ideas about preserving soldiers' lives. But Homma understood something. The Americans on Bataan were already dying. Disease and malnutrition were doing what bullets couldn't. For 99 days, the defenders held out. They were on half rations within a week of the siege beginning. They ate monkey meat, mule meat, anything they could find. Malaria and dysentery swept through the ranks. When General Edward King finally surrendered, a third of his men were already sick or wounded. They had nothing left. And here's where the horror begins. What followed the surrender was the Bataan Death March. 65 miles through tropical heat, no food, no water, guards who bayoneted anyone who fell behind. Between 5,000 and 10,000 Filipino soldiers died on that march. 650 American soldiers were murdered. Thousands more would die in the prison camps over the next 3 years. Homma claimed he didn't know about the atrocities. He said the march was supposed to be humane, that his subordinates acted without orders. After the war, an American tribunal didn't believe him. He was convicted of war crimes and executed by firing squad on April 3, 1946. But the surrender itself, the complete collapse of American forces in the Philippines, that was Homma's accomplishment. He defeated MacArthur so thoroughly that Washington ordered the general evacuated to Australia before he could be captured. MacArthur left by PT boat on direct orders from President Roosevelt. His men, the ones he left behind, became prisoners. MacArthur vowed to return, and when he did, 3 years later, he made sure Homma paid the ultimate price. Whether Homma deserved execution for crimes his subordinates committed is still debated. What's not debated is this. He handed America the most humiliating defeat of the Pacific War, and for every American who survived Bataan, the name Homma meant one thing: the general who broke them. Number 3, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, 82 days. That's how long the Battle of Okinawa lasted, April 1st through June 22nd, 1945. When it was over, more Americans had died than in any other battle of the Pacific War. Over 12,000 killed, more than 36,000 wounded, and those numbers changed everything. Mitsuru Ushijima commanded the Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa. He knew he couldn't win. Japanese air power was shattered. The Imperial Navy was gone. There would be no reinforcements, no resupply, no rescue. Ushijima's mission wasn't victory, it was attrition. Make the Americans pay so dearly for Okinawa that they would reconsider invading Japan itself. And he nearly succeeded. Ushijima studied what had failed on other islands. The beach defenses that got obliterated by naval gunfire, the banzai charges that wasted lives for nothing. He threw out the playbook. Instead, he let the Americans land unopposed. On April 1st, 60,000 troops walked ashore expecting a bloodbath. They found nothing. The first few days felt like a gift. It was a trap. Ushijima had concentrated 100,000 troops in the hilly southern region of Okinawa, tunnels, bunkers, interconnected defensive, positions that couldn't be hit by naval artillery. The Japanese called it defense in depth. The Americans called it hell, the Shuri Line, a series of fortified ridges stretching across the island. Every ridge was a fortress. Every cave held soldiers who would fight until they were burned out. Sugarloaf Hill cost the Marines nearly 4,000 casualties to capture. Hacksaw Ridge. That's where Desmond Doss earned his Medal of Honor, pulling wounded men off a cliff while Japanese soldiers tried to kill him. For 2 months, the Americans ground forward through mud, monsoon rains, and constant fire. Progress was measured in yards. Casualties mounted every day. The Japanese held every position until resistance was physically impossible, then retreated to the next line. And then there was the sea. 1,500 kamikaze aircraft dove into the American fleet off Okinawa. 30 ships sunk. Over 300 damaged. Nearly 5,000 sailors killed. It was the largest sustained kamikaze campaign of the entire war. Ushijima fought until June 22nd. When his final position was about to be overrun, he and his chief of staff committed seppuku overlooking the ocean. His last message to Tokyo pledged that he would apologize to the emperor with his death. Here's why Ushijima belongs on this list. Okinawa was so brutal that it profoundly shaped American strategic thinking. President Truman, the Joint Chiefs, and military planners looked at the casualty projections for invading the Japanese home islands and saw a nightmare. If one island cost this many Americans, what would an invasion of Kyushu cost, or Honshu? The estimates ranged from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million American casualties. Nobody wanted to fight another Okinawa. And that calculation, that terror of what an invasion would cost, was a major factor in the decision to use atomic bombs instead. Ushijima didn't save Japan, but he made America weigh nuclear weapons against an invasion that could have dwarfed D-Day in bloodshed. That's the legacy of Okinawa. That's why Ushijima is number 3. Number 2, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya. If you asked soldiers in 1942 to name the most feared Japanese general, the answer was always the same. Yamashita. He earned that nickname in 70 days, and he earned it by doing the impossible. February 15th, 1942. Singapore, the fortress that could never fall. 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian soldiers surrendered to Yamashita's 25th Army. It was the largest surrender in British military history, and Yamashita did it with 30,000 men. How? Speed, audacity, and the kind of tactical brilliance that made his enemies doubt their own intelligence reports. When Yamashita invaded Malaya in December 1941, the British expected a conventional campaign. Hold the jungle, defend the roads, fall back to Singapore and let the fortress hold. Yamashita understood that the fortress was a myth. Singapore's guns pointed out to sea. They couldn't be turned inland. And the jungle that was supposed to protect the peninsula? Yamashita's soldiers moved through it faster than anyone thought possible. They used bicycles, thousands of soldiers pedaling down jungle trails. When one unit encountered resistance, they would flank through the undergrowth and appear behind British lines. The defenders kept retreating because every time they set up a defensive position, Yamashita's men were already behind them. The British commander at Singapore, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, had more than twice Yamashita's numbers. He had artillery, he had supplies, and he had a fortress that was supposed to hold for months. Yamashita hit him so hard and so fast that Percival couldn't organize a defense. On February 15th, with Japanese troops inside the city and water supplies running low, Percival surrendered. Yamashita captured 200,000 prisoners in 10 weeks. Singapore was supposed to prove that European colonial power could withstand Japanese expansion. Instead, it proved the opposite. Asia would never look at European empires the same way again. And here's the irony. Yamashita's success made him enemies. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo saw him as a threat, a general so popular that he might challenge Tojo's own position. After Singapore, Yamashita wasn't given another command. He was sent to Manchuria. Virtual exile. While the war turned against Japan, the Tiger of Malaya sat in a backwater far from the fighting. They didn't call him back until 1944, when everything was falling apart. Yamashita was sent to the Philippines to stop MacArthur's return. He took command in October, just weeks before the American landings. His troops were exhausted, his supplies were gone, and this time he was on the defensive. Yamashita fought for the Philippines for 8 months. In Manila, Japanese forces committed atrocities that would stain the occupation forever. Whether Yamashita ordered those atrocities or even knew about them is still debated. After the war, he was tried under the Yamashita Standard, the legal doctrine that a commander is responsible for crimes committed by troops under his command, even if he didn't order them. He was hanged on February 23, 1946. The Tiger of Malaya died in disgrace, but for 2 years, from December 1941 to February 1942, he was the most terrifying general in Asia. He proved that European colonial empires could be broken. He proved that speed and audacity could overcome numbers, and he proved that Japan could win. For the Americans who faced him in the Philippines, Yamashita's name alone carried weight. He was the general who had beaten the unbeatable. Even as the war turned against him, he remained dangerous. And that's why he's number 2. Number 1, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi. 21,000 Japanese soldiers, 26,000 American casualties, 1 volcanic island, 5 weeks of fighting that the Americans expected to last 5 days. And, at the center of it all, a general who completely reinvented how Japan fought. Tadamichi Kuribayashi was different from almost every other Japanese general. He had lived in America. He served as a military attaché in Washington and traveled extensively across the country, visiting factories, military installations, and shipyards. He saw firsthand the raw industrial power that Japan could never match. He wrote to his wife, "The United States is the last country in the world Japan should fight." But when the emperor chose him to defend Iwo Jima, he accepted. And then he did something no other Japanese commander had done. He threw out everything the Japanese army believed about defense. No beach defenses. The naval bombardment would destroy them. No banzai charges. They were suicide with no tactical value. Kuribayashi forbade them. Any officer who ordered a banzai charge would be disciplined. Instead, Kuribayashi built something unprecedented. 11 miles of tunnels, 18 kilometers of underground fortifications connecting pillboxes, artillery positions, and bunkers. 5,000 caves, Every position was connected to every other position. You could destroy one entrance, and soldiers would emerge from another 100 yards away. The volcanic rock was so soft it could be cut with hand tools, so Kuribayashi's men carved a fortress into the island itself. The Americans arrived on February 19th, 1945. They expected resistance on the beach. They found none. Kuribayashi let them land. He waited until 30,000 Marines were packed onto the black sand, unable to dig foxholes in the volcanic ash. Then he opened fire. Artillery from positions that couldn't be seen, machine guns from caves that couldn't be located, mortars that killed Marines by the dozen and then went silent before counter-battery fire could find them. The Marines called one sector the Meat Grinder. They called another Bloody Gorge, names that described what happened there. The battle was supposed to last 5 days. Kuribayashi held for 36. Here's the statistic that defines Iwo Jima. For the only time in the Pacific War, American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties. 26,000 Marines killed or wounded, nearly 7,000 dead. The Japanese lost 21,000 men, but they made the Americans bleed for every inch of that island. Marine General Holland Smith, who commanded the landing, said of Kuribayashi, "Of all our adversaries in the Pacific, Kuribayashi was the most redoubtable." That's military language for the most terrifying. The best, the one who came closest to breaking us. And at the end, Kuribayashi didn't retreat to his bunker and commit seppuku while his men died. By all accounts, he led the final attack himself. On March 26, 1945, he gathered his last 300 soldiers. He reportedly removed his rank insignia so his body wouldn't be identified. And he led them in a night assault on American positions, slashing through tents, fighting hand to hand until it was over. His body was never found. The exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain, but the evidence suggests he died fighting alongside his men as an ordinary soldier. Kuribayashi turned 8 square miles of volcanic rock into the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. He did it with fewer men, fewer resources, and no hope of rescue. He did it through planning, through innovation, and through a refusal to waste his soldiers' lives in pointless gestures. The American military studied Iwo Jima for decades afterward. They still study it today. What Kuribayashi built there, the defense in depth, the tunnel networks, the calculated attrition, those tactics showed up again in Korea, in Vietnam, in every conflict where an outgunned defender wanted to bleed a superpower. Tadamichi Kuribayashi knew he was going to lose. He said as much in his letters home. But he also knew something else. He could make victory cost so much that the Americans would think twice before doing it again. And when Okinawa came 2 months later, when the casualty projections for invading Japan started circulating, when the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, part of that calculation traced back to one general on one island who showed exactly how expensive the Pacific War could become. That's why he's number 1. Not because he won, because he made winning hurt. Let's add them up. Hayakutake on Guadalcanal, Homma at Bataan, Ushijima on Okinawa, Yamashita in Malaya and the Philippines, Kuribayashi on Iwo Jima. 5 generals, 5 battles that shaped the Pacific War, 5 names that American soldiers learned to fear. The Pacific was a different kind of war. No front lines that moved like in Europe. No civilians welcoming liberators. Island after island, cave after cave, a grinding war of attrition against an enemy that would not surrender. These 5 generals were the best that enemy had to offer, and the cost of defeating them still echoes in American military history. But here's the real question. Did we get the ranking right? Should Yamashita be number 1? Should Ushijima rank higher for Okinawa's influence on the atomic bomb decision? Drop a comment right now and tell us your ranking. Tell us who we missed, tell us who doesn't belong on this list, and tell us where you're watching from. Our community spans the entire world, and you're part of what makes this channel work. If this ranking changed how you see World War II, smash that like button. Every like tells YouTube this is content people want to see. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into military history. We've got more rankings coming, more forgotten stories, more history. That doesn't make it into textbooks. Thank you for watching. These generals deserve to be remembered for what they actually did, not what propaganda turned them into. We'll see you in the next one.